Hello and welcome back to Christ UMC's audio training series. This is episode 2, and today we're going to go into basic usage of the board, primarily focused on a normal Sunday morning. This is kind of my procedure on how I do things. This is not by all means the definitive standard on what needs to be done, but this is what I like to do. One, start off with try to get here 15 minutes early. If at all possible, that makes a big difference because sometimes you might find surprises. Sometimes you might find that someone's got a new thing they want to plug in. You might find microphones aren't working or something else might be going on entirely. So a little bit early gives you extra time to get in, prep, and get an idea of what's going on for the day. The second thing I like to do is grab a bulletin. I'm going to take a normal Sunday morning bulletin and run through it. I like to skim it, get an idea of what groups are involved. Like, for example, we'll just start from the top here, go down, okay, normal prelude, there's a pastoral greeting, the chancel choir is involved, there's some reading, if you're doing first service, there's a youth choir listed here, a chancel choir at second service, children's sermon. The rest of it's pretty standard, self-explanatory. A lot of speaking, a lot of music. And it doesn't look like there's too much in the way of specialty microphones. If you're running first service, you might check to see whether the youth choir needs extra microphones. But for the most part, most Sunday mornings it's just going to be, 4, 5, 6 microphones, maybe 2 at a time at most, and should be fairly straightforward. We'll go into each phase as we work through it. Check the bulletin. I also like to take a look around, just make sure there's no one left a post-it note. Sometimes you will find that someone was nice enough to leave a post-it note that says, we're going to be using this microphone, it's going to be for this time in the service. Maybe the offertory has a special music that has a special microphone. Maybe we're using a different microphone for the children's sermon. Usually we try to use the red handheld, but maybe not always. And then, of course, turn the board on. Bring the board up, let everything boot up, and then one of the first things I do once the board is on is take a look and mute everything. If something's unmuted, and you probably can tell that this channel 17 is unmuted right now. I'm actually using this for the recording itself. But if you turn this on and there's anything unmuted at all, I like to mute it just so I know what I'm working with. I know what's giving sound to me. There's less surprises later. Over here on the side of the mixer desk, we have our recorder unit here, the silver unit here in the middle, and then we have the 4 wireless base stations for the body packs, the clip-on microphones and the headsets. In this scenario here, as we're looking at this, what I like to do at the beginning is take a look and see what microphones are on. You can actually tell what microphones are on, or at least in range, just based on the signal reception. So for example, right here, if you look at the left side, this area here, if all this looks pretty dark and dormant and there's no bars lit up here, then you're probably not live. The only other way you can tell is if there's no battery indicator in this bottom right corner, that means it's not really receiving a signal from a wireless pack. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to turn one of these mics on. And just watching the screen here, you can probably guess which one I just turned on. The white wireless bell pack. What just happened here, and you can compare the difference, and actually the battery just lit up. The signal strength just showed up right here on this left. So if you get a full solid bar here, that means this wireless microphone is definitely on. Or, I'm sorry, if you get a full signal here, then you're definitely receiving something. If you have a battery icon over here on the right, then you're definitely getting signal from the bell pack. Now if you see this and it's just kind of bouncing around and there's no battery icon, you might actually be receiving some interference. Usually we don't have that issue. Let's say you come in, you turn everything on, and you do have reception. You are picking up one of the microphones and it's got a little battery indicator. There's there's a maximum of three little boxes here. If all 3 of these boxes are lit up, then you have a full battery. If only one of them is present, or if the battery is totally empty and there's no little boxes lit up inside, you probably have a low battery, and it's possible someone might have left it on from first service if you're running sound for second service, and it's likely they need to go change the battery. The other thing you can see right here, and you can actually see the word mute at bottom center. Mute does a couple things. One, if it says mute, it's either I'm getting nothing useful and I'm not going to present it, I'm not going to provide it to the board, or in this case, I just flip the mute switch on the pack. So you can actually tell right here if someone's got the mute switch on. And if they have the mute switch on, there is nothing you can do other than get their attention. So if this mute is on, hopefully that means they know it's there. Hopefully that means they know it is turned on, and they will unmute themselves when the time is appropriate. You can tell right from there, again, whether they're muted or not. I'm going to turn that mute off. Microphone is now live again, and I have control over it on the board if needed. The other step at the beginning of the service, especially right before the announcements and preludes start, is we're going to go ahead, we're going to start the recorder. Rather get too much than not enough. So let's go ahead, I'm just going to hit this record button. It's the biggest red button here. It's pretty obvious. When you hit that, you should get the record light lit up, and you should also get this green play pause to light up. As people are speaking, as you have music being fed through this system, you should get some type of volume indicator here. Generally, you want it to go half to 3/4, somewhere in there. That's a nice solid signal. Plenty of volume to work with. If you're getting up towards the top here, something might need to be adjusted, and it's probably just your individual microphone channel volume. On occasion, you will have times when someone else will let you know they're using something extra. They have an extra guitar plugged in, they have an extra microphone plugged in, maybe for a band. Occasionally, someone will have a laptop up front in order to play a video. In that type of scenario, usually the most important piece of information is what number are you plugged into. If they can just follow their cord and say, oh, I'm plugged into 15, with the numbers up on the plates, up on the mic jacks and the chancel area, those numbers are going to line up with what you have on the board here. So for example, 15 is guitar. So if they say, I'm in 15, one way you can do is over here on the right, the meters, go to input. Now this is showing volume. Like in this example, I'm using this microphone here, so you can see my volume bounce around. If they are indeed plugged into 15 and they're plugged in correctly, you should be able to tell them, all right, go ahead and play a little bit hard, and you can actually leave them muted for this. If they play hard, you should get their volume to come up to about half, maybe 2/3, somewhere in this middle area here. That will clearly tell you, okay, I'm definitely getting signal from you. Now go ahead and play a little quieter, and we unmute. And let's listen to it. Let's just make sure it's working. Let's make sure there's no weird staticky noise. Usually a lot of that stuff is going to be either connectors on their side, or in the case of a guitar, maybe there's a battery you need to replace. So that is true for guitars, that's true for wired microphones. If someone wants to plug into, say, 11, or up front they can also plug into 17. Those are a couple of mic jacks that are easily available. You can plug in there and you just say, okay, what channel are you on? 11? Okay, unmute. And that should be pretty straightforward. As far as the plugging a laptop in for video is concerned, that is video, which is channel 21 here. The adapter box they have up there should also have a label on it that says channel 21 video. So all you should have to do is be able to unmute that, and you should be pretty much good to go in terms of volume there. I would not put this up past half until you have an idea of how loud it is. If at all possible, try to test before the service starts. And again, watch your volume indicator up here. Give it a try. If you need to start lower, and verify that it's not going to be too loud and bring it back up again, that's fine. Just as an aside here with the video and connecting a laptop in, there's definitely times when plugging the laptop in and playing a video, you get this really nasty low-pitch noise. It's a low-pitch hum. There's a lot of technical detail we could go into, but the long and the short of it is there's too many power cords plugged in. If you can ask them if hopefully the laptop has some battery power, and if they can unplug their power cord while they're running audio, that will usually correct that issue. In some circumstances, there's not much you can do about it. The good news is that, at least as far as channel 21 is concerned, there is a little bit of EQ going on here to try to correct some of that. If someone comes up and says, hey, I have a CD, I need to play this during this portion of the service, it should be fairly straightforward. The CD player is on the right. It's pretty much, turn it on, eject, hit play and go. As far as the board is concerned, the channels over here on the right, CD left and CD right, will control the volume for that CD player. The mutes for these 6 channels over here are all kind of paired. So if you press one mute button for CD left, they both unmute. They both behave at the same time. So on an older style board, it was very common to say, okay, I'm going to press both of these. And you can actually confuse yourself a little bit because you're instantly turning them on and off at the exact same time. So if you just press one, then the pair changes all at once. And again, bring it up to about half, give that a try and adjust from there. Over here on the right side of the board, we have the master speaker controls. These generally do not need to be adjusted at all during a service. You can leave these as is and adjust your microphones individually. There have been times when people will adjust these, and these can actually be pretty detrimental towards other areas of the sanctuary being able to understand what's going on. So if you pull some of these down, be aware you can be causing the choir not to be able to hear what's going on very well. Going from right to left, the rightmost slider here is the slider that controls the volume for the main speakers. And again, you shouldn't need to adjust this, but it is here. This controls the main 6 on the lower frontal section of the sanctuary. Moving left 1, this is the controller for the choir speakers. It just controls the 2 choir speakers and nothing else. And then sub 3 here, this leftmost one, is labeled balcony. And it's actually the speakers for above the balcony as well as below the balcony. All 4 of those are connected. Now, what I've done, the balcony speakers are intentionally a little bit lower than the rest. That is because what I did was played a piece of music and kind of walk between the different areas of the sanctuary and try to balance things out so it was a consistent volume across the different areas of the sanctuary. I did that as well for the choir speakers compared with the main area of the sanctuary. And again, these volumes, you shouldn't need to adjust them, but they are there just in case something needs to be changed. If under odd circumstances, say you're doing a play and you have a lot of microphones, you need 6 or 7 microphones on all at the same time up in the chancel area, you can go ahead, in terms of the choir speakers, you can mute just the choir speakers, or if absolutely needed, I can't see a reason why, but you could mute just the balcony speakers. That is there. Just for normal Sunday morning, make sure these lights are both off, because you definitely want these speakers on. Okay, so now that we have gone through, we've gotten everything prepped, we have an idea of what's going on, we've read through the bulletin, etc. Now the service is going to start. We have a recording going, and so let's assume that we start right from the very beginning here. The first item that really actually does anything the way a normal sound during the main second service, beyond the praise band starting out, is a pastoral greeting. So it doesn't list which pastor it is. So get an idea of who might be doing that. Normally, a blue dot microphone is very common for a pastoral greeting for our head pastor. Sometimes our assistant pastor over here on purple. So as needed, you can either unmute that one or unmute that one, and make sure these volumes are somewhere near the center. You can adjust as needed. I think I implied it in the first video, but I'll go over again some of the basics here. As I was saying before, the red, if you have it all red, then these are all muted. There's not allowing any sound into any of these channels. This mute button affects just one microphone, and in this scenario, it's the blue dot microphone, which is heavily used by our head pastor. The slider itself affects volume, so if you need more, push it up. If you need less, pull it down. It's pretty simple. As far as volume is concerned, as far as trying to get a gauge of where you should be setting volume, try to take a listen. And unfortunately, with the way our room is laid out here with the different speakers, it can be a little bit of a challenge from up here in the balcony. But you generally want it so that you can clearly hear what's being understood, but without it being too loud that it could become abrasive. You want to assume that, try to get an idea of how loud the person is currently speaking and kind of take a guess as to whether they're going to get louder or softer as the service goes on. I like to start where it feels comfortable and give it just a hair more, but not too much. It's really easy to give too much volume. At the same point, make sure you can understand them. Make sure you can hear what they're saying and you can clearly know what's being communicated and without having to strain to guess what they're saying. So let's assume then our pastoral greeting has finished, and the next step on this is a prelude. Now, before I even go any further, on a normal Sunday morning, once I've skimmed this bulletin and I have an idea of who's doing what groups are involved, I actually like to take this bulletin and get rid of it. And get it out of my way. I don't want other distractions. The bulletin is wonderful. It is usually accurate, but there are absolutely times when there are surprises. There's times when there's new things added. There's times when someone wants to make one quick announcement and it might not be listed in the bulletin. So with that, I find it's better to pay attention and be watching who is moving. If you can watch how people are behaving, what people are looking at, what people are up front are trying to make eye contact with the congregation, you could probably assume those people are going to be the next ones to be talking. If you have that in mind and you're already watching what people are doing, you can kind of have your finger on the button ready to go and say, oh, well, this person is about ready to speak. They look like they might be ready to say something. And okay, then now they're talking. So you can maybe get them unmuted just a brief moment before they start talking. Whenever possible, you can leave a couple microphones on, but I like to, especially with the wireless, if they're done talking, mute them. That's generally the best option, because then you don't have the chance of they're singing during the hymn and you don't need them picked up for the singing. That's kind of what the choir is there for and what the rest of the congregation is there for. You generally don't need one person leading unless they're intending to do so. So with that all aside, I am going to bring the bulletin back in just for my own reference because I don't have the whole entire service memorized, and we're not doing this recording during a service itself. So as soon as the initial greeting is wrapped up, we're going to go into a prelude. Now, generally it's not a bad idea to leave choir 1 and choir 2. These two microphones, the choir 1 and choir 2, are the hanging microphones that are above the chancel area. These will get a lot of general room noise. They'll definitely get plenty of organ and piano. They'll definitely get the choir if the choir is singing, and that all is fine. You can make sure that's not too much. I will generally leave this a little bit below half, just because we don't need to hear what they're doing. This is more a benefit for the recording itself. So a little bit of background noise, get an idea of what song is being sung, etc. That's kind of the primary purpose for this, not necessarily to be able to hear the choir. Depending on who's singing and what they're doing, you may want to push it up a little bit just to kind of give the choir a little bit of a boost, but probably not too much. Once we wrap that up, we then have, in this example, a call to worship. So in this example, we have two different pastors talking. You probably want just both pastors on. And depending on where they're talking, you might actually want to turn these hanging choir mics off. Usually, you kind of can leave these hanging choir mics on for most of the service, but if you have wireless microphones in use, they're absolutely going to sound better with just the wireless microphone and not with the extra echo that comes off of it, the whole entire chancel space echoing their voice. So when they wrap up, we then go into a hymn. So again, hanging choir microphones on and mute the pastors so that you're not hearing the pastor singing. I'm sure they both have wonderful singing voices, but I don't think they appreciate being broadcasted. From here we go into commonly an opening prayer. Usually this is done at the lectern, not always. Sometimes someone will surprise you and walk out and do it standing up just from the wireless microphone. That's fine if that's what they want to do. But again, that goes into paying attention, who's doing what, who is moving where. With the lectern microphone, you're welcome you can turn that on. You can leave one or two of these on. I don't want to leave all microphones on the whole service. But I will bring this lectern mic on just in case they're going to speak there, and then turn it off if I don't need it. And again, the pulpit and lectern probably can start kind of in the middle. And again, these microphones, because they are so sensitive, they don't need to be pushed up very far. You can kind of start where you're comfortable, start somewhere in the middle, and work from there. As long as you can clearly understand what they're saying, and then bring it up just a hair more, you should be fine. So there's a prayer, there's a call to confession, there's a congregation's prayer or confession. All of that involves speaking and is probably all from the lectern microphone, not always. Once you start into a communal group speaking, where it's speaking in unison, you obviously have the person up front who is the leader, who was doing the opening prayer. What I like to do when you have one leader and everyone else is saying the same thing with the leader, I'll pull the mic down just a hair. You don't need them to overpower the whole room, but it's no harm in letting their voice come through and letting others being able to hear what they're saying. It doesn't necessarily need to be clearly understood because the words are listed right here in the bulletin, but it can give solidarity and timing, that everyone's speaking together and you can kind of hear the pauses. So bring that back up again a little bit. When the unison prayer is done, some personal time, so that will have likely some music included. So again, choir, having the two choir microphones on is fine for that. We go to gospel lesson, which again will probably be lectern, so you can probably leave this on. Be prepared for a gospel lesson. Most people, for the gospel lesson, we usually have a lay reader come up and do that rather than one of the regular pastors. So in that situation, you generally have people who are less accustomed to the microphone. Be prepared for things like they get up there and they want to adjust the angle of the microphone. Maybe they come up and then they want to clear their voice. Maybe they don't know how close to stand to the microphone, so you might have a louder volume. Just kind of be ready to grab this and pull it down. Kind of get an idea of where it is, and if you need to, grab it down real quick and then bring it back up as they start giving more useful audio as they start speaking. In this scenario, first of the month, we had a mission moment. Again, same thing, lay speaker on the lectern. From here, we go to an anthem. And again, anthems, most of the time you don't need microphones, but if you have a younger group, you usually have the two kids stick microphones out front. And if that's the case, then you want to go to find kids left, kids right, bring them on, and then once you have them on, if you know you're using them, you want to mute everything else. When you have the hanging microphones on, and you have the kids' microphones on, and you have, say, the pulpit and lectern, all six of those on at the same time, you're going to be asking for some feedback. The more microphones you have on, the more chance of having that. It's called feedback. It's a nasty high-pitched squeal. Not always high-pitched, but usually high-pitched. And that comes from too many microphones being on, and at least some of those microphones being able to hear the speakers. If the sound loops, goes in the microphone, out the speaker, in the microphone, out the speaker, and repeats over and over again, that's what causes that nasty feedback loop. So when you have multiple sensitive microphones, make sure you don't have too many of them on at once. So in the case of this kids, let's say the kids wrap up, and from the anthem, we go into a children's sermon. Now, with On a normal day, it depends on who's giving it, but usually we'll use the red handheld wireless. So you can unmute that, have that ready, and you're probably not going to get too much in the way of rustling noises. They're moving it around. And then we go mute the kids, and then might as well go ahead, unmute the hanging mics, because maybe you pick up a little bit of the kids speaking on the recording. From there, we go to a hymn. So as soon as the kids' sermon is done, let's say mute the red handheld. This is especially handy if again, paying attention, if you're watching and they wrap up and they're finished and they pull the microphone away from their face and you know they're done, go ahead and mute immediately. That does a couple things. One, they're rustling around. Two, they might have a kid come up to them and ask them a final question, and it might just be a personal conversation. And three, you might have someone putting the microphone back into the stand and pushing it into the clip, and that can make a notable amount of noise. So if you can have that muted before all that happens, that's very handy. From there, again, hymn, probably just need the two hanging choir mics on. From here, we go to another lesson, so you can have the lectern ready as soon as the music wraps up. I like to have that on. And then from there, what usually happens is the sermon, I'm sorry. I just said second lesson. This is kind of where, again, watching who's moving where. It's common for whoever's giving the sermon to actually walk out from behind the pulpit area and assume that the wireless is available. So I'll go ahead, depending on who's doing the giving the message, I'll go ahead unmute their microphone as soon as they stop singing, so that they're ready to give the second lesson. It's usually not on the lectern. I apologize for that. And then you can probably just leave them on for the sermon. Now, there's a kind of a contention about how many microphones do you have on for the sermon itself. Well, I'll tell you this. One, you probably don't want the hanging mics on. On rare circumstances, if you had some type of audience participation during a sermon, maybe you want these on, but for the most part, you're just going to get echo and extra noise from the room. The other question that often comes up is, should I use the pulpit? Should I use the wireless? Should I use both? Should I have the pulpit and the wireless on? In this situation, having both of them on at the same time can actually cause a weird cancellation effect. The technical term is called comb filtering, where if two microphones are hearing the same noise, but they're hearing it at slightly different times, you can actually end up with certain pitches canceling out, and you end up missing some parts of the audio spectrum. So whenever possible, if you feel like you're getting a consistent sound from a wireless and it's not clipped to an extreme shoulder, like it's somewhat centered, or if they're using a headset microphone, then if all possible, use just the wireless. If you feel like the wireless is being inconsistent and if they're turning their head back and forth a lot, then by all means, and when I switch microphones, I'll show you what I do, but by all means, I would use the pulpit if the wireless is not giving a consistent volume. Now, in a smoother transition, if you wanted to swap from one microphone to the other for one speaker, and let's just say they're on the wireless and we want to switch over to the pulpit for some reason, what I like to do is I'll bring the pulpit down, bring the one that I'm not using yet down, unmute it. So there's not a drastic change right now. We've added just a little bit of volume on a microphone we have not been using before. And then what we can do is bring the one up and kind of pull the other one back down as we are bringing the one up. So kind of give the one we're moving to a boost, and bring the one we're getting away from, bring that down, and then we can mute that, and then there's less of an abrupt change. So the sermon's wrapped up, and we're now going into a time to pass the piece and be social. With that point, what I like to do is intentionally leave the pulpit on and also leave the lectern mic on. This gives options for whichever pastor wants to try to wrap up the piece at the end to be able to get people's attention easily. So what that means is I can leave these both on, leave them on as background noise, and actually I boost them up a little bit so that when someone does need to get people's attention, they have a little bit extra power there. Then once I've done that, then I can go ahead, be social, shake hands, make eye contact with those around me, and go from there. I don't have to pay attention to what's necessarily going on up front. Generally, whoever is doing the leading is accustomed to using one of those two microphones in order to get people's attention. So I can kind of leave that be until I hear something. Then as people start finding their seats, I can bring these back down and probably mute one of them, whichever one's not being used. From there, we go into offertory, etc. Beginning of the offertory, you'll expect someone to speak. So you probably, whatever microphone you had open up immediately after the piece, you probably just keep on using that one. And as soon as they finish speaking and the music starts, you want these hanging mics on so you can pick up the offertory music. And you probably want to mute the pulpit or lectern, whoever's been speaking. That's kind of optional. If I'm a little paranoid and I know I'm paying attention well today, I'll probably mute that one. As the music finishes and the plates are coming back up, you want to watch to see who has walked behind the altar. Generally, whoever's the first person to stand behind the altar is usually the one who's going to be doing the speaking. So you can have their microphone ready, probably not going to need it until they actually have the plates in their hand. But in this moment, when one of the pastors is behind the altar and ready to receive the offering and the plates, this is when you need to pay attention and make sure you don't have too many other microphones on. If you have the choirs and you have the pulpit and the lectern on, if you have all 1, 2, 3, 4 sensitive microphones on all at the same time, and then you add a wireless, that can be a lot. And simply the positioning of standing behind the altar puts them more into a range where the choir speakers are projecting to them. And in this situation, it's very easy to get feedback as soon as someone walks behind the altar and you have 4 microphones on. So I would definitely have pulpit and lectern off while someone's behind the altar. Let them finish speaking, and you probably want those hanging mics off as soon as the music finishes. It doesn't need to be, but you get a little bit more echo if they're talking into three microphones at the same time. So again, finish up the offertory. They go into the Lord's Prayer, so we probably at that point go back to the unison speaking, which is that someone starts and you can probably bring them down just a hair, let them lead that speaking, but not necessarily let them broadcast their voice over top of everybody else. Kind of let them do the timing without necessarily announcing all the words. And then from there, usually on most days, we'd go into another hymn. In this example on the bulletin I have here in front of me, we actually went into communion. So with that scenario, you probably have 2 pastors back there, and you probably need to have both microphones at the ready. And in this scenario, if you have both pastors unmuted at the same time, you definitely want hanging mics off. So they'll probably go back and forth for a communion, and one person might do part of the reading for one section, and then another pastor might switch off for the other section. Again, on a normal morning, you probably just have one person back there, and then we go into a hymn at the end. As far as if you do have communion, we'll obviously have hymns there to sing along to as people are walking and partaking. And in that scenario, we go back to the standard hymn setup where you have most speaking mics muted and the 2 hanging mics open, so you kind of get a general ambience from the musical instruments, whatever they may be. From there, we wrap up. We do as many songs as needed. On a normal morning, it's just the one hymn, and then again we flip back over again. So we have leaders doing additional speaking, so you probably unmute them as soon as the words finish on the hymn, and as soon as the piano or organ is done playing, we try to mute the hanging choir microphones. Again, optional, but the further back they are, the more chance you have having problems. Let them speak, and then that all wraps up, and we go to the postlude, which again, we just flip again. So all pastors off, hanging mics on. Let that finish, and what I like to do is allow the recording to take the whole postlude. Once the postlude has finished, then we can go over to the recorder, hit stop on that. If you record and you let this record for a full hour, hour and a half or whatever, this light will start blinking, and it will blink and blink and blink, and it could take easily 3 to 5 minutes for that to finish. What that is doing is it is synchronizing and copying this file back to a computer in the music room, so that later someone can go through and edit and crop out portions of the service as needed and reuse it as needed for shut-ins and the website, etc. Once everything is wrapped up and you're no longer really using the board for anything, go ahead and mute everything. If at all possible, try to leave all microphone channels muted when you're done for the day. That leaves a nice clean slate for the next person to come in, and it's also very helpful for all microphone channels to be muted when you turn the whole board and the whole desk off, because having microphones on when you power the system up can cause popping noises. If you get a loud crack, that's usually because a microphone was left on, and that can do a little minor damage to the speakers over time. It usually doesn't do anything severe just once or twice, but over time it can cause problems. As an optional step when you're wrapping up, if you wish, the board itself actually has a bank of saved settings where you can kind of reset back to a common set of defaults. In order to do this, the procedure is to press and hold underneath this mix scenes area, press and hold the number 1. Now when I do this, I'm actually going to mute myself, so I actually have to fix my own microphone. But I'm going to go ahead and press this, and it's going to change a couple things on the board. Press. Okay, so when I pressed mix scene 1, a couple things happened. One, it reset everything back to normal defaults. What that did, among other things, is it muted all the channels, including my own channel, so I had to fix that real quick. And it's actually gone ahead and adjusted some volumes, but the faders themselves are still in the same position, these volume sliders. So in the case of, say, over here, there's a couple LEDs and there's a couple extra ones on these two channels in particular. What this is saying is for these channels that just have one little dash, it's saying the fader is in the correct position. With this channel, it's saying it's too high. It's not in the correct position. I have changed the volume and you need to move the fader. So again, this is kind of an optional thing. You don't need to be doing this, but if you want to set everything back and kind of make it sort of standardized, what we do in order to fix this and correct the faders being in the wrong spot is for these two, they're too high. So let's go ahead and bring them down, and you'll notice it's getting closer to center. Now it's just got that one little center hash, so we know it's in the right spot. Once you have fixed it, once you have put it in the correct spot, then you can move it around again like normal, and the fader is now in control. In the case of some of these other sliders here, where in this example, it's got a couple extra LEDs, the slider is not in control. I can actually pull this down and move it around, and it's not doing anything until I get to one little dash. Once I get to one little dash, now the fader is in control and I can actually affect the volume. So this is really important, that if you do go ahead and load mix scene 1 back again in order to reset the board back to our normal defaults, then in that scenario you'd have to kind of go through and fix all these sliders so that they are in the right spot. So I'm going to fix this one, and I'm going to fix this one, and now all these channels have one single dot, or one single dash there, and that is also true for these up here. You want to make sure that all the subs and all the mains sliders are all in the correct spot. Once you have corrected everything and you know that there's just one dash for each one of these channels. What this has done is changed all the LEDs so they're in locate mode. You can just press, once you have everything corrected, press this locate button again, and everything will go back to normal. You'll see your volume indicators up here again, and your settings down the middle. And then again, if you wish, meters input is where I like to leave it, just so I have an idea of what's coming into the board. So, I thank you all for listening and letting me go over what would normally be done on a Sunday morning. Hope that was informative and helpful. If there's any questions or concerns, please let me know. And until the next one, take care.